Hello, and welcome back to Happy News, etc. Today, we're going to continue where we left off with Thomas Paine, Common Sense. As to government matters, it is not in the power of Britain to do this continent justice. The business of it will soon be too weighty and intricate to be managed with any tolerable degree of convenience by a power so distant from us and so very ignorant of us. For if they cannot conquer us, they cannot govern us. To be always running 3 or 4 thousand miles with a tale or a petition, waiting 4 or 5 months for an answer, which when obtained requires 5 or 6 more to explain it in, will in a few years be looked upon as folly and childishness. There was a time when it was proper, and there is a proper time for it to cease. Small islands, not capable of protecting themselves, are the proper objects for kingdoms to take under their care. But there is something very absurd in supposing a continent to be perpetually governed by an island. In no instance hath nature made the satellite larger than its primary planet, as England and America are with respect to each other. Reverses the common order of nature. It is evident they belong to different systems, England to Europe, America to itself. I am not induced by motives of pride, party, or resentment to espouse the doctrine of separation and independence. I'm clearly, positively, and conscientiously persuaded that it is the true interest of this continent to be so, that everything short of that is mere patchwork, that it can afford no lasting felicity, that it is leaving the sword to our children and shrinking back at a time when a little more, a little further, would have rendered this continent the glory of the earth. As Britain hath not manifested the least inclination towards a compromise, we may be assured that no terms can be obtained worthy the acceptance of the continent, or any ways equal to the expense of blood and treasure we have already been put to. The object contended for ought always bear some just proportion to the expense. The removal of the North, or the whole detestable junto, is a matter unworthy the millions we have expended. A temporary stoppage of trade was an inconvenience which would have sufficiently balanced the repeal of all the acts complained of, had such repeals been obtained. But if the whole continent must take up arms, if every man must be a soldier, it is scarcely worth our while to fight against a contemptible ministry only. Dearly, dearly do we pay for the repeal of the acts, if that is all we fight for in a just estimation, it is as great a folly to pay a Bunker Hill price for law as for land. As I have always considered the independency of this continent as an event which sooner or later must arrive, so from the late rapid progress of the continent to maturity, the event could not be far off. Wherefore, on the breaking out of hostilities, it was not worth while to have disputed a matter which time would have finally redressed, unless we meant to be in earnest. Otherwise, it is like wasting an estate on a suit at law, to regulate the trespass of a tenant whose lease is just expiring. No man was a warmer wisher for reconciliation than myself before the fatal 19th of 1775 in April. But the moment the event of that day was made known, I rejected the hardened, sullen tempered Pharaoh of England forever, and disdained the wretch that with the pretended title of father of his people can unfeelingly hear of their slaughter and composedly sleep with their blood upon his soul. But admitting that matters were now made up, what would be the event? I answer, the ruin of the continent, and that for several reasons. First, the powers of governing still remain in the hands of the king. He will have a negative over the whole legislation of the continent. And as he hath shown himself an inveterate as he hath shewn himself such an inveterate enemy to liberty, and discovered such a thirst for arbitrary power, is he or is he not a proper man to say to these colonies, you shall make no laws but what I please? And is there any inhabitant in America so ignorant as not to know that according to what is called the present Constitution, that this continent can make no laws but what the king gives leave to? And is there any man so unwise as not to see that, considering what has happened, he will suffer no law to be made here but such as suit his purpose? We may be as effectually enslaved by the want of laws in America as by submitting to laws made for us in England. After matters are made up, as it is called, can there be any doubt but the whole power of the crown will be exerted to keep this continent as low and humble as possible? Instead of going forward, we shall go backward, or be perpetually quarreling, or ridiculously petitioning. We are already greater than the king wishes us to be, and will he not hereafter endeavor to make us less? To bring the matter to one point, is the power who is jealous of our prosperity and proper power to govern us? Whoever says no to this question is an independent, for independency means no more than whether we shall make our own laws, or whether the king, the greatest enemy this continent hath, can have, and can tell us, there shall be no laws but such as I like. But the king, you will say, has a negative in England. The people there can make no laws without his consent. In point of right and good order, there is something very ridiculous that a youth of 21, which hath often happened, shall say to several millions of people, older and wiser than himself, I forbid this or that act of yours to be law. But in this place, I decline this sort of reply, though I will never cease to expose the absurdity of it, and only answer that England, being the king's residence, and America not so, makes quite another case. The king's negative here is 10 times more dangerous and fatal than it can be in England, for there he will scarcely refuse his consent to a bill for putting England into as strong a state of defense as possible, and in America he would never suffer such a bill to be passed. Protection. America is only a secondary object in the system of British politics. England consults the good of this country no further than it answers on her own purpose. Wherefore her own interest leads her to suppress the growth of ours in every case which doth not promote her advantage, or at least interferes with it. A pretty state we should soon be under such a second-hand government, considering what has happened. Men do not change from enemies to friends by the altercation of a name, and in order to shew that reconciliation now is a dangerous doctrine, I affirm that it would be policy in the king at this time to repeal the acts for the sake of reinstating himself in the government of the provinces, in order that he may accomplish by craft and subtlety in the long run what he cannot do by force and violence in the short one. Reconciliation and ruin are nearly related. Secondly, that even the best of terms which we can expect to obtain can amount to no more than a temporary expedient or a kind of government by guardianship, which can last no longer than till the colonies come of age, so the general face and state of things in the interim will be unsettled and unpromising. Emigrants of a property will not choose to come to a country whose form of government hangs but by a thread, and who is every day tottering on the brink of commotion and disturbance, and numbers of the present inhabitants would lay hold of the interval to dispense of their effects and quit the continent. But the most powerful of all arguments is that nothing but independence, i.e., a continental form of government, can keep the peace of the continent and preserve it inviolate from civil wars. I dread the event of a reconciliation with Britain now, as it is more than probable that it will be followed by a revolt somewhere or other, the consequence of which may be far more fatal than all of the malice of Britain. Thousands are already ruined by British barbarity. Thousands more will probably suffer the same fate. Those men have other feelings than us who have nothing suffered. All they now possess is liberty. What they before enjoyed is sacrificed to its service, and having nothing more to lose, they disdain submission. Besides, the general temper of the colonies towards a British government will be like that of a youth who is nearly out of his time. They will care very little about her, and a government which cannot preserve the peace is no government at all. And in that case, we pay our money for nothing, and pray what it is that Britain can do, whose power will be wholly on paper, should a civil tumult break out the very day after reconciliation. I have heard some men say, many of whom I believe spoke without thinking, that they dreaded an independence, fearing that it would produce civil wars. It is but seldom that our first thoughts are truly correct, and that is the case here, for there are 10 times more to dread from a patched up connection than from independence. I make the sufferer's case my own, and I protest that were I driven from my house and home, my property destroyed, and my circumstances ruined, that as a man, sensible of injuries, I could never relish the doctrine of reconciliation, or consider myself bound thereby. The colonies have manifested such a spirit of good order and obedience to the continental government as it is sufficient to make every reason